Now, there's not a single person here at the festival who will not be affected by the climate crisis. As we speak now, there are people in the Eastern Cape, in Southern Africa, in Malawi, Mozambique, who are dealing with the after effects of cyclones. So this is an opportunity to discuss and to find out about how the climate crisis will affect you, but also to find out about why the climate crisis is a human rights issue and what we can do to make sure that government, the fossil fuels industry, the private sector respond properly and swiftly and urgently to mitigate the climate crisis. So that is a town hall debate that is starting in a few minutes' time. It's scheduled to start at 11:30 in the People's Power Forum in the center of Constitution Square. Please make your way down there to the People's Power Forum Town Hall discussion in the center of Constitution Square. Starting at 11:30, a discussion on how to survive the climate crisis. A discussion where you can find out about how we are affected in South Africa. You can find out about the impact of the climate crisis on poverty and inequality, on food and on human rights. 11:30, that's in 2 minutes' time, in the People's Power Forum in the center of Constitution Square. Please go along. There's a wonderful panel of activists to talk to the issues, waiting to start and waiting for you to find your way there. 11:30, the People's Power Forum in the People's Power Forum in Constitution Square, the center of Constitution Square, the big marquee. It doesn't matter why you're here. You can be here as a tourist, you can be here as a visitor, be here because you're a human rights activist. Pop in to the People's Power Forum discussing the climate crisis and how to survive the climate crisis in the center of Constitution Square, starting at 11:30. Let's fill up that venue and learn from the discussion. 11:30, the People's Power Forum is meeting as a town hall to discuss the climate crisis, how to survive the climate crisis. The first of the meetings of today in the third day of the Human Rights Festival. The weather has been kind to us. We've had a lovely march around the streets of Johannesburg and Braamfontein with about 200 proud, committed human rights activists. Now it's time to sit down and attend the discussion in the People's Power Forum on the climate crisis. The climate crisis is a human rights issue. Climate crisis is an inequality issue. Join the discussion in the People's Power Forum at 11:30. That's in the center of Constitution Square. Hurry along to that discussion. It's going to start any minute now. They're just waiting for you to join and take a seat so that they can get started. So 11:30, the People's Power Forum, Constitution Square, a discussion on the climate crisis. Make your way there, please. You can see how. Thank you very much. I hope you're all listening. I hope you're all marching towards the People's Power Forum. I hope it's filling up in there. Climate crisis is a human rights issue. It's a human rights issue for all of us, wherever we are, whatever issue. They don't know where it is. People, it's in the middle of Constitution Square, right opposite the Constitutional Court, between the two glass light towers, the big marquee, the People's Power Forum, having a discussion on the climate crisis, 11:30, in the marquee in the middle of Constitution Square. Find your way there. They're waiting to start, and they want a full house before they begin this important discussion on the climate crisis, because it's something that affects all of us. We may not think of it as a human rights question, but it is a human rights question. It's an issue that will make inequality worse, water shortages worse, health worse, basic education worse, migration worse. All of these issues will be impacted as the earth heats up and as global heating gets more and more extreme. 11:30, the People's Power Forum in the marquee in the center of Constitution Square. 11:30, that is 2 minutes ago. Just needs you to go along there and to want to debate and learn and listen, share your ideas, share your experiences. 11:30, the People's Power Forum in Constitution.
Blue.
10 minutes is no joke.
Sticks with.
So what's gonna happen? Oh, am I already marked? As each of you presents, you'll stand in front. Next stand.
Yeah.
That's 2 feet.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Fish.
Just making sure my mic is working.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Now we're on. Looks like we're on.
We're just going to do a mic check and then take it from there. And welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us in this town hall. If you have anybody that is lingering somewhere and you know them, maybe you can give them a call and tell them to come and join us. It's a town hall discussion, so it's not only going to be the panelists who will be talking. We're also going to open it up to the public. But I think I'll do the introduction first. Are we ready to go, my guys?
Is your mic on or are you projecting? Sounds like you're projecting. Is your mic on or are you projecting? Okay.
That would have been
Just check.
Comrade leader, tell me when you are ready.
You may proceed, comrade.
I will hear from you, from the leader. Where's my partner in crime, Ferial? Where is she? Ferial, where are you hiding?
At the criminal.
How?
She's
How?
loving the
How?
masses.
So I'm the only one here. Putting me on the hot seat.
There she there.
Oh, there you are. Yeah. Hey, my partner in crime. Come to Uzo, man. Hey, come to Uzo, baby.
Is this
Okay.
unstable? I feel like it might just fall, brother. Why do I feel like this is not stable?
Dawn, are we good to go? Oh, nice,
Thank
nice,
you.
nice. Yeah. And it's a nice warm day today compared to. All right.
Okay, now
5
voice.
minutes, good people. 5 minutes.
Should I speak
Umlungu
higher?
uphumile, uthe
But
5
like-
minutes.
It's not picking up though.
Yeah, if you pick up.
Okay, is it?
It's picking up. That's
Okay. Just sad but concerned, but okay.
Okay.
My shift's done.
Okay. Increase the volume.
You can come and grab the front seat. Don't be shy. Eh?
Higher.
Come grab the front seat. Don't be shy. Yes.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. So I've just been kindly reminded that we are online. So for those who are online, please give us 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes is now 4 minutes. Because I said 5 minutes a minute ago, so now it's 4 minutes. So please give us 4 minutes. We will start.
Has it been streamed? Has it been streamed?
People are just
Onward,
getting
the criminal
settled in.
side.
And our technical team is ready for us there
Maybe on the
to
website.
take us
To the content side.
to other parts
Oh, okay.
Con Hills YouTube page.
of the country and the world. I'm on TV, yeah?
Famous.
tape. I use tape for these other two this side. Okay, greetings once again, everybody, formally now, to say welcome. I have the most easiest of jobs, and mine is just to introduce one person who is going to introduce other three people. So you see, my job is very easy. I introduce one person, finish, klar. Then I go and I join the crowd there. But I just wanted to say welcome. This is a town hall discussion that has been jointly organized by Watercan as well as Greenpeace. And I just want to introduce my colleague there, my partner in crime, as I was saying, Feriel. Wave, let the people see you. So this is a discussion that we are hoping, or a town hall discussion that we are hoping that everybody will be bold enough to participate in. And yeah, do your thing. So the one person that I need to introduce is called Leti Wenkosi, who is from Youth Capital. So I have just a small bio here of her that I asked her that she should send to me. So as I said, Leti Wenkosi is a mobilizer with the Youth Capital Network, and she's also a storyteller whose mission is to amplify African voices. She has a BA, undergraduate degree and an MPhil in African Studies from the University of Cape Town. She has over 3 years experience in facilitating, which is why she's sitting there in that hot seat. Youth Capital is also a youth-led advocacy campaign to reduce youth unemployment. And I'm proud to say that Greenpeace also has a very beautiful partnership with Youth Capital in the work that you are also doing. Over to you, Ketiwe.
Thank you so much. That's yours. That's yours. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So yeah, I'm really happy to be a part of this important discussion. A discussion that will not only just happen here. This is a town hall discussion, so we encourage every person in this space to please participate. And just to kick us off on participating, I have a very small exercise to do, a very small one, before I introduce my colleagues that are seated with me on the stage. So basically, the exercise is just you repeating after me, or you saying what I'm going to ask you to say, right? Banditi justice, niti transition. Justice? Transition. Justice? Transition. Whoa, man, you see, someone should have corrected me. Just, not justice. I was just checking if everyone is awake. But no one corrected me. Let's do this again. Mangiti just niti transition. Just transition. Just transition. Mangiti just niti transition. Niti just transition. Just transition. That's okay. All right. So we're talking, it's going to be part and parcel of our conversation, and we'll unpack it, because oftentimes when we hear the words just transition, we hear about it from different angles, and the focus largely is on the climate crisis, and that's an important part of it. But this is an issue that's intersectional. So we're going to hear different perspectives. And I asked you to all say that because I really wanted to encourage different voices. Because this conversation is not just between myself and our audience, but I want different voices, different experiences, different perspectives to be shared this afternoon. Speaking of, and this will happen just as I'll wait for the noise to subside. Okay, so as I did that, just to repeat myself, I asked us to do that exercise because I want to really encourage different voices, different perspectives, different experiences to be shared in this space. So please feel free to share your thoughts after the speakers have put forward their point of view. Speaking of the speakers, I'm joined by a collective of individuals who collectively have a wealth of knowledge. They are activists, they are researchers, they are well versed in what we'll be discussing this afternoon. To start us off, we have, who I'm not going to call a friend, we have Vish, who is the Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Witwatersrand, the co-founder of the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign, and he's also part of the Climate Justice Charter campaign. So he wears the hat of an academic, but also he's an activist. And in our discussion, he will be sharing his knowledge, giving us the science behind the climate crisis and its impact on our food systems. He'll also speak about the implications of the just transition insofar as our food systems are concerned. Good afternoon, Vish, and welcome.
Afternoon, Mandla.
All right, too. That's all, okay. Next to him, we have Umshengu Umtutuzile Shabalala, who is an activist. He has been an activist for many years. He's been in the trenches. And so he's well versed when it comes to what people experience. And today he'll be talking about the state of our water system and what the just transition looks like insofar as improving our water systems. Msheng, welcome. Last but certainly, well, actually, no, second to last, we have another activist sitting next to Umtu, Julia. Julia Taylor, who is a researcher on climate and inequality at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies. Previously, she was a researcher. Previously she was a researcher and climate policy lead at the Institute for Economic Justice, where she worked with labor unions, COSATU, on a vision on a just transition. Julia previously worked on impact and research, sustainability, consulting, and eco-education. She holds a BCom from the University of Cape Town, a PhD in sustainable development from Stellenbosch University, a Master's in Science and Environment and Development from Edinburgh University, and an MCOM in Applied Development and Economics from Wits University. Her research, just in case you're like, wow, man, what to add to that is that her research interests include inequality, employment, feminist economics, and climate justice. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, we have Kolofelo. Kolofelo is a paralegal at Section 27 and has been in the organization since 2019. She has a Bachelor of Technology in Marketing from Tshwane University, a certificate in paralegal studies, and is currently pursuing an LLB. So at Section 27, one of her focus areas is around sexual reproductive health rights for youth and children, because she believes in, the power to create a safe environment. She believes in providing people with information, empowering them so they can make decisions about their body and their well-being. She has a heart for the more vulnerable members of society and helping people. And that's why in today's discussion, she'll be talking about children's rights through the lens of the just transition. Kulu, welcome.
Thanks, Etue.
All right, so as I said earlier, what will happen is that our speakers will come forward, present their point of view, and as they're doing so, I really encourage every person in this space to take mental notes, take notes if you have a notebook, so that you can also converse, be part of the discussion. And to kick us off, I'm going to ask Vish to step forward and present his point of view in terms of the science behind the climate crisis and its impact on our food systems. Vish, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I first want to test the audience. What do we want? Climate justice. What do we want?
Climate justice.
What do we want?
Climate justice.
When do we want it?
Now.
When do we want it? Now. Madla. So big thank you to the organizers for hosting this town hall and posing a very fundamental question to all of us. How do we survive the climate crisis? It's a very apposite, very timely conversation. 10 years from now, this conversation will be irrelevant if the current trajectory prevails. I also want to just apologize for not joining you in the march. This late morning, early afternoon. I had a medical appointment for some long COVID challenges, but I would have wanted to be there. I also want to just maybe say something about how, as a person, I'm grappling with this challenge. Because, you know, when you internalize this challenge, it's a terrifying problem. It's a complex problem. It's a problem that challenges all of us in very, very profound ways. So I veer from, and I've been doing this for over a decade now in my professional academic life and as an activist. So I veer into sort of deep sadness and despair also when I think about this problem. I think about the young people, I think about the next generation, and it's raw emotion. The other side of this is deep, deep anger. Because with the tools of social science, we know that powerful forces are standing in the way of us solving this problem. Whether they are politicians, whether they are corporate CEOs of oil, gas, and coal companies, whether they are bureaucrats in the multilateral system, and so on. And for 30 years, they've failed us, basically. Now, this is a life and death matter. That's what's at stake here. A life and death matter. It's whether you, the ones you love, the children you might have a future. That's what's at stake here. So we've tried as climate justice activists to test our rule of law, our rights, and so on. When the floods hit KZN, we attempted to charge the president, we attempted to charge the premier of KZN and the mayor of the city of Durban with culpable homicide. This was testing the frontiers of our law. Of course, the captured criminal justice system blocked us at every turn. But I'm here today to invite all of you who are serious about the Constitution, who are serious about rights and law, to help us push the frontiers of law, to push back on this problem. We need CEOs of oil corporations, coal corporations in the dock, because the more they push extraction and emissions and so on, the more the planet heats and the rate of death increases. And they're all assholes. Yes. Now, at the same time, I want to test you. What's the worst case scenario we are facing with the heating planet? More oil, coal, and gas extraction. Anybody? What's the worst case scenario? I want to reinforce the point I'm trying to drive home here.
Climate hell.
Climate hell. Exactly. A world that is catastrophic, a world in which it all ends. And it's going to be a painful end, not an easy end. An end with great suffering. Great, great suffering. And it'll be a world also of climate famines. And climate famines have started. Now, between 2014 and 2021, South Africa had one of the worst droughts in its history. And most of you don't know that. But that drought impacted the 14 million people that were hungry in this country in very, very devastating ways. Food prices just skyrocketed, and most people, particularly women, couldn't feed their families. They couldn't put food on the table. They were skipping meals. They were eating less to make sure their children were fed. Our response in 2015 was to launch the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. We started with a hunger tribunal right here in the women's jail with the Human Rights Commission to have testimony from across our society, and the stories were heartrending. We had a bread march, like your march this morning, through the streets of Joburg in 2016. We then tried to figure out a whole lot of things. Our food system was collapsing during the drought, by the way. Our wheat production, our maize production, livestock production. And we realized that, wow, and if you think about it, if COVID hit us in 2016 or 2017, we would have been a net importer of food aid as a country. So our dominant food system hasn't been meeting the needs of the majority, and it was falling apart in the midst of this catastrophic drought. And so one of the things was to think about the next food system. the food sovereignty alternative that democratizes the food system, that ensures the right to food lives in everyday life. And that's an idea that gives control of the food system to small-scale producers and consumers. And we developed, in a participatory way, a People's Food Sovereignty Act, which we took to Parliament in 2018. We took to 7 ministries in the country to say, let's start thinking about this next food system. Here's a people's alternative. Of course, that fell on deaf ears. But the second thing we tried to figure out was, what is going on? This climate shock, collapsing food system, etc. So we engaged the leading climate scientists at my university, and the challenge we put to them was, please translate the global science so we understand it. What does it mean for us as South Africans? So the key takeaways, which I want to share with you today, are first, based on the science, that we are one of 10 hotspots on planet Earth. We are heating faster than most places on planet Earth for a whole host of geophysical conditions, being south of the equator, etc. I don't want to get into it, I don't have time. The second thing is that we are heating at twice the global average. So now we are at about 1.2 degrees Celsius of heating. When we overshoot within the next decade, 1.5, we'll be at 3 degrees of heating. And that is going to be very, very dramatic, which is the third takeaway. The scientists confirmed that all our life-supporting systems, including our food systems, are going to be in trouble. Livestock cannot handle such high temperatures. Some of our food crops cannot handle such high temperatures. So of course, in that context, we also took that to Parliament, but I'll say more about that just now as I conclude. And then the third thing we said was, we've got to connect social justice to climate justice. And in that process, we had a deep dialogue with drought-affected communities, constituencies across society, labor, faith, etc. And we developed this document that's on your chairs. It's the first climate justice charter in the world. I want to make 2 final points and then end. The issue of climate science is something we must keep front and center. So the UN process has just finished its 6th cycle of reporting. This week, the UN issued a synthesis report on the best science humanity has. The 3 documents plus the synthesis report are the most important documents we have as humanity to understand the science of climate change. The one big takeaway from these documents, and some of them are very long, is that already, with just over 1 degree Celsius heating, over 3 billion people on planet Earth are vulnerable, and they are facing disproportionate impacts. They also cautioned us that we are running out of time, so we have to prevent a 1.5 degree Celsius overshoot. The final point I want to make is about hope. It's very hard doing this kind of activism, knowing these realities, but we've got to have hope. But there's false hope, and we must be able to recognize false hope. False hope is the propositions and the answers that the elites, the powerful, give us to delay transformation. The assholes in the oil, coal, and fuel industry, okay? The Elon Musks who want to take us to Mars, one of the most uninhabitable planets in our solar system, and waste resources and sell us delusions when money should be going into our rainforests, into our biodiversity systems, into food, etc. We must reject false hope. Those are assholes. The second thing that we must be very, very clear about is fake or shallow hope. Shallow hope. Now, the United Nations General Secretary declared we must accelerate the just transition. Well, it comes 3 decades too damn late. That should have been there front and center from the beginning. And most importantly, they should have been talking about phasing out fossil fuels 30 years ago. And that's because the multilateral negotiations has been captured by these interests, by these assholes who are killing us, okay? The last point is genuine hope. And genuine hope comes from us collectively organizing. All the movements that have faced oppression, that have faced adversity, and the challenge of survival have brought people together. And this, for me, is our hope. The Climate Justice Charter and the Climate Justice Charter movement. The vision of the Climate Justice Charter is a plurivision. What does that mean? It means that we must address the legacies of apartheid as part of challenging the climate problem. We must address the poly-crisis we are living now as part of addressing the climate problem. And together, we must ensure a livable, just, and democratic future. Amandla!
Amanda! Thank you so much. Thank you for that charge. But also thank you, Shane, for those insights. I want to ask Mdu to step forward and now talk to us about the water systems. We heard about the impact of the climate crisis in terms of our food systems. Can you tell us more, drawing from your work as an activist, what has been the impact insofar as our water systems are concerned?
Good day, everyone.
You might need to project. Or maybe, okay, let's try it.
Good day, everyone.
Thank
My
you.
name is Mdu, coming from the Val. I will speak about the direct impacts which I saw in the past, at least in the past 12 years or 10 years or so. I've been working with the Val Environmental Justice Alliance as a community activist, whom they introduced me to the Val Barrage catchment forums. When we talk about the Val Barrage catchment forums, we talk about the Val River system itself, especially the Val Barrage in just before Paris in Vanderbilt Park. There is Klep Spruit coming from South Joburg. It's here in Soweto. It goes straight into the Val River via 3 rivers. And then we have Blesbok, which is coming from Springs. Also, it gets via 3 rivers. And then we have the Daibo Spruit is in Free State, next to the Val Dam. It comes through via Sasolburg, and then we have the Louis Spruit. Those are the 4 Val Barrage catchment forums which I've been monitoring for the past 10 years, since 2012. Yes. And I'm trying to bring this sum up because I want to bring a picture to what we are talking about when we talk about the, for instance, in our case, it must be the Val River systems in Gauteng. I might be wrong with figures because sometimes I've been trying to find correct figures which they are missing. Maybe, I don't know. But we often struggle with figures, especially when we have to research about a just transition. I think it has been a topic that has been very much left behind, especially because it has to bring the transition that Prof is talking about, the justice, the previously disadvantaged people who have been excluded in terms of vote. For instance, we can talk about the population of this province. When we are told there's about 14 million by now in Gauteng province, it could be more. The numbers could be more. Out of, yes, it means in this 14 million population of this province, we are getting fresh water directly from Lesotho Highlands. All of us, we are getting water from Lesotho Highlands, and which is received via the Val Dam. Val Dam, which is less than about 6 kilometers from where I am. Yeah, it's not more than 6 kilometers from where I am. Exactly at the Val Dam, you find Letabo Power Station. It's a coal power station which was built in the early 80s. It was commissioned in 1983 when I read about it, in 1983, which the year I was born in. Yes, and it's a 6-unit of 1,500 megawatt. Yes, and now in Gauteng there's about 14 million of us, when in my opinion I think there's more than that. Department of Water and Sanitation is saying that all 14 million of us are getting water from the Val Dam, and that is something like 330 to to 340 million cubic liters per day. That is per day. But let us talk about Letaba Power Station with a 6 unit of only 1,500 megawatt. The 1 unit of Letaba Power Station consumes about 120 million megaliters, cubic liters of water. You times that by 6, that is something like 720. That is now 2 times Gauteng province daily consumption. Now the question here is that, are we still capable of doing the coal way of power generation? That is the most important question we need to ask. By the way, an average person in South Africa would use something like 300 liters of water per day. That is surpassing the United Nations standard of about 240 liters per day. But with 3 million cubic liters per day as the entire size population, which is more, because the reality of this 340 million cubic liters per day of consumed by 14 million people. Out of these 14 million people, the reality and the real observation is that more than 30 to 40% of these people are using buckets and wheelbarrows to carry that, to receive that water, by the way. So hence the numbers could be more. And at Letaba Power Station alone, they are consuming more than the daily average of population in the province. And Letaba Power Station is servicing the entire Gauteng and the Northern Free State. And Lesotho, by the way. We are giving Lesotho electricity in exchange of giving them water. They are getting that electricity here from Letaba Power Station. And for personal observation, Letaba has bypassed the laws when they are supposed to be consuming only 320 million liters. Now, by design, Letaba Power Station is a 2-unit functioning. It is supposed to function on 2 units when 2 units are supposed to be on standby and 2 units are supposed to be under maintenance. But the reality, we can go there today. I went there many times. We can go there today. All 6 units are functional. Then it means they bypass the 3 million liters per unit. It's now times 6. That is 720 megaliters per day they are taking. When we are told that reserves cannot pump water to local pump stations because we have load shedding, but you find factories like Amstel here in Klebrefir, we don't even know how much water they consume. And they never complain about load shedding and unavailability of water because they are working every day. They are brewing every day and they are polluting water every day. You know, versus ArcelorMittal, who is consuming, Letaba is consuming at 120 megaliters per unit. ArcelorMittal is 6 times per unit of Letaba. That is too much of water used every day. And when you look at Letaba Power Station, it is an old design which was designed in the late 70s, early 80s, which versus Medupi Power Station and Kusile Power Station. Those are fairly new designs and they are not yet functional. Some of us knew by then that they are never going to be functional. Why? Because a Medupi Power Station alone, the 1 unit of Medupi Power Station will equals to 6 units of Letaba Power Station in terms of consumption rate, water and pollution. So that is too much of water. That is why we are not having electricity in this country, especially using coal. And for instance, I'm one person who is farming from the farming community. And most of the farmers in South Africa are not using natural water, especially river water, flowing natural water to irrigate, because most of our rivers are polluted. Most farmers, they use borehole mostly. They would use borehole because that is the most safest water, especially if you want to go commercial. They use borehole. And then some of us, at least, we are trying to survive because we don't only rely on water to farm. There's quite a lot of ways. I'm sure Prof would know what I'm talking about. especially if you're using permaculture. There's quite a lot of way to dodge irrigation. You can use mulching, cover cropping and so forth. To even, especially if your soil is very, very well nurtured, you don't really need much water to farm.
Right.
But most people are not exposed to such skills, and most people are not having access to water. So you find most people not farming. I've went to Mpumalanga, and especially in Limpopo, many people are not farming, especially people from your African communities.
Sure.
And most of us, we cannot even afford borehole system. So most people are not farming because of water access. But you look at the coal power stations themselves, we are consuming too much water every day. Nonetheless, the household use. But the systems we have been using, it's quite intense. There's a need for a just transition.
Thank you. Amandla! Thank you so much, Duduzile, for painting that picture for us. Really highlighting the nightmare that Prof started talking on earlier when he started delivering. That not only are we faced with the issue of the earth heating and not being able to grow crops, then we have farmers who cannot rely on water. So it's really an urgent matter that we must address. Julia, Du spoke about, or rather alluded to the inequalities that are exacerbated by the climate crisis. Can you expand on the inequalities, that are pre-existing but also are a result of the climate crisis, and also the issue of unemployment, which, when we think about what would happen if we don't take action, more people will find themselves unemployed because of the climate crisis. Can you expand on that, please?
Sure. Thanks very much, Letiwe. So I'm really excited to be on this panel today. Thank you so much for having me. And it's a tough act to follow both of these speakers. Thank you so much. But kind of in summary, climate change is going to exacerbate inequality. And as one of the most unequal countries in the world, we can't risk that, right? We have to take action. And that's why a just transition, which is a transition to a lower carbon, more sustainable economy, has to account for justice. We can't switch off coal and turn on renewable energy and not change anything else in our society, because that won't be just. And we still won't be sustainable. When there's social injustice, our economy and our society is also not sustainable. So inequality is also built into climate change because the amount of emissions created by the global north and the rich are actually, far exceed the majority's per capita contributions to carbon emissions. So the responsibility and the people who are emitting the most are actually those who are not going to be suffering from floods and droughts because they can afford to build, around flooding and to secure themselves against these issues. This is why climate justice is a social justice issue. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this just transition idea. It's often talked about as something that might happen in the future. So we need a just transition. But when's it going to happen and who's going to make it happen is fairly unclear. But actually, there are examples of transition already. South Africa is already transitioning to a renewable energy system. And since 10 years ago, when the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Procurement Program started, that was where Eskom started saying, okay, bid to us to sell renewable energy to Eskom. And private producers then started producing renewable energy. And that led to the development of solar power plants and wind throughout South Africa. Obviously not enough, but to some extent. And so my research has involved understanding what the experience of people in the towns where solar power plants have been developed has been. And this is because we have examples of transition that we need to learn from in order to demand a just transition. So we can ask ourselves, well, is the transition that's happening already in the energy sector just or not? And what can we learn from those examples? So I did interviews in the Northern Cape. I went to 3 towns, Kathu, Kuruman, and Uppington, where solar power plants have been built around those towns, because the Northern Cape is a really good hub for solar power because it's so hot, because there's a lot of sunlight and little clouds. And I spoke to workers and community members, as well as people who manage solar power plants and people involved in the government program as well, the IPP program, to understand what their experience and perspective on this, on the impact of the solar power plants has been. I found that if energy transition is carried out at scale, in the way that it has occurred in these 3 towns, with privately owned utility-scale solar power plants that do not support local access, it will not deliver justice for the poor and working class. So the ideal of this just energy transition assumes that renewable energy is somehow inherently more equitable and less exploitative than carbon. And I'm by no means saying that carbon sources are, better, but I'm just saying we also need to be critical and thinking about renewable energy and understanding, well, just because it's renewable doesn't mean it's going to be more just or workers are going to be treated better. So a lot of modeling has been done around this transition and what it's going to mean for jobs and employment. And particularly in South Africa, the models say, yes, there are going to be more jobs in total. So we're going to lose maybe 120,000 jobs in the coal value chain, but there are going to be many, many more in the renewable energy sector. But as soon as you scratch the surface of those models, you realize that the jobs are different. Okay, renewable energy jobs are in construction, not in operation and maintenance. So they're short term. They're also not going to be in the same regions of South Africa. So Mpumalanga has been our energy hub. But now renewable energy is distributed. It's in the Northern Cape, it's in the Western Cape. So those workers in the energy sector in Mpumalanga, are they going to migrate? Are they going to go back home? How are we going to support those livelihoods when those coal power stations eventually decommission over the next 20 to 30 years? And so workers are, for good reason, skeptical and very wary of this transition. Because although these models show this kind of good picture, once you dig into under the surface, there are big questions. And so during my interviews, I found that people in these Northern Cape towns who got jobs in the solar power plants enjoyed the jobs while they had them. It was great to get work, but they didn't last very long. They were short term. And the question of who actually benefits from these solar power plants was raised, because they are often internationally owned. European firms come in, they build the solar power plant, they use local workers, but the manager is still a French guy or a Spanish dude. And once the power plant is constructed, they head back to Spain. And they leave a couple of people to wash the panels, to mow the lawn, and to be security on the power plant. But it's not the same kind of ongoing formal employment that exists in actually the coal value chain. So in these towns, there's still a crisis of social reproduction, which means that people are surviving on low wages, no access to basic services. Similar to what Mduduzi was saying, people have to walk 500 meters to the nearest tap to access water. Villages in those areas still don't have power. So imagine how it feels to be sitting in a village and you see this huge construction of a solar power plant and everyone promises this is going to be cheaper electricity, it's going to bring jobs, but you still don't have power, you still don't have access to electricity, and the affordability of the electricity isn't going down, it's still going up. And so this creates, and then also cost of living in general is increasing, right? And this creates pressure on the unpaid care work that happens in the household within these towns, which is often conducted by women and children, not exclusively, but often. And so the work that's happening in the household to keep everyone alive, cooking, cleaning, healthcare, that kind of work is becoming harder and harder if you don't have access to electricity, if you don't have access to water. And so the shift in a just transition would require better wages, longer term work, more support from the state, more public service provision, and allowance for subsistence in the household. But that's not happening. That's why I argue that the transition is underway and it's not just. So jobs and livelihoods, as I've mentioned, did not improve the ability of local communities and workers around those solar power plants in the Northern Cape to survive in the long term. The experience of workers is that it is short-term work, underpaid, and did not support employment. The work is also structured in a very similar way to the rest of the South African economy. It's divided by gender and race, and only 25% of women are working in this sector compared to 13% in the coal value chain, so it's an improvement, but it's still, it's not more equitable necessarily. And racism and sexism in the workplace persist. There's subcontractors, there's exploitation. So it's not this dream of a just energy transition that many people promise. So the question comes up, who benefits? Is it the European firms? Is it coal mines? So one example is that there's a coal mine, a manganese mine just outside Kathu. And the manganese mine has a substation right next door to it, because South Africa's electricity system has been developed around a minerals energy complex. So where the electricity goes is where the mines are, right? Because that's how our economy was developed. And so this manganese mine has a substation, and because of that, the renewable energy plant needed to plug into a substation, so it plugged into the same one that the manganese mine had already set up. And that means that the manganese mine, during load shedding, benefits from the power of the solar power plant. And the rest of the community and village is still in darkness, experiences load shedding. So I really want to focus on this issue of electricity access. A just energy transition, or the just transition generally, often focuses a lot on formal jobs. But there's a whole informal economy around these sectors. There are public services that are provided by mines often. And so we need to think about service provision as part of a just energy transition. At the moment, those communities around the power plants are surviving on a combination of different livelihood strategies. They're trying to get grants from the government. They're getting wages from a cousin who works on a mine. They are farming and selling their produce if they can, if they have access to land. And so access to land and water are also fundamental for a sustainable livelihood strategy. So what do we want a just energy transition to look like? It can't only be about formal jobs. It has to ensure access to electricity, land, and water to support survival and subsistence. It can't be structured around worker exploitation. We have to address this issue with subcontracting, racism, and sexism in the workplace. We can't also expect that just because the energy source is going to change to renewables, it's going to somehow enhance justice. There are broader systems that must be restructured. And so there are some ideas that came up from my interviews where people said, well, actually something small scale would be more useful for me. I would love a solar power lamp. I would love a solar geyser. So how can we think about these small scale interventions as kind of more transformative in this transition?
Right.
Sorry, last point. Then if we take a step back and we look at the global context, so as I mentioned before, the global north is largely responsible for the most emissions that have led to climate change. And yet, every single country is going to be affected, and particularly countries in the global south. African countries are already experiencing reductions in farming yields and crises in terms of flooding and drought. South Africa is now at a crossroads in terms of global climate policy. So the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which has been offered to South Africa, which is $8.5 billion, could provide finance for a just transition. But South Africa needs to be very careful and ensure that the terms of this agreement are beneficial to the majority of South Africans, because we can't continue to have a setup where foreign firms come in and exploit our local workers and communities. So this also is important because this Just Energy Transition Partnership is potentially one of the few, one of the first of other partnerships across the world. So Indonesia is now working on a Just Energy Transition Partnership, and what South Africa does with it is going to influence how other countries address it. So it's really important for South Africa to take a strong stand and push back on terms that don't benefit the majority. I'm going to end there, but I think the last word is that inequality exacerbates climate change, and climate change exacerbates inequality. And so human rights and basic access to services are really fundamental to all of these struggles. At WITS, so I work at WITS University, we're trying to enhance everyone's understanding of climate change. And over the last 2 years, we've started a first-year course where every single first year who comes into WITS does a course on climate change. And that's going to set us up to have, thousands of graduates in a few years' time who understand the issues around climate change and inequality and are eager to address them. We hope. That's the plan. But so far already, we've got 12,000 students who've been through it. So we're really excited for and hopeful about what that means.
Come on,
Thank you.
come on, come on. Mangithi just need to transition. Mangithi just need to transition.
Transition.
We must always interrogate this just transition. Kulu, I want to come to you lastly before we open it up to the floor to talk about those that are the most affected. And Julia alluded to women being part of the group of those most affected. But I also want to talk about children, right? And I want to talk about children through the lens of the issue of malnutrition, kind of connecting the dots from what we've been hearing since the beginning, where kids find themselves malnourished, not able to go to school, etc., and basically not able to experience their rights. So can you connect the dots for us between children's rights and the climate crisis?
I think I'm audible. Am I?
Yeah, now you are.
Okay. Good afternoon. It's afternoon, right?
Yeah, it is.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try to connect the dots. But before I do that, I have a question. And it doesn't have to be answered now. I think Letty will circle back to it when I'm done. What was the aha moment for you? What was the moment where you thought, climate change is real and climate change is affecting me personally? So my interest in climate justice was not something that was academic for the last 10 years or something that I thought about. I always knew you have to sort your trash out, put the plastics where the plastics are and the glasses where the glasses are. But my personal aha moment came in last year with the KZN floods when a friend of mine's house was taken away. So her and her 3 kids were now homeless. And that was hit home to say, this is actually real. This is actually affecting each and every one of us. And that was my aha moment to say, okay, I really need to get my feet in and just jump in and see what is this whole climate change. What are they talking about? What is this just transition that everybody keeps talking about? Is it an academic term? Is it a social term? Is someone in Limpopo, where I come from, going to understand that term, right? And how do I break it down to a 5-year-old that is living in Gampahlele? How do I break it down to a 5-year-old living in Messina, saying, what are you talking about? And that's where my interest came in with the rights of children and climate justice and just transition. So just to connect the dots at first, right? So gender affects power roles. It affects who is in power and how. So when you look at children and women, they're the ones mostly affected by climate change. If one looks at a rural setting, you find that climate change will affect them the most because they are the children that have to walk 10 kilometers to get water. So if there's a drought, their safety is compromised because now they have to walk 15 kilometers to get water. So that affects women and children. Also, children can't walk in scorching heat to school if climate change continues the way it is. So there's ripple effects, but these mostly affect women and children, especially in a rural setting. So in most policies, you find that children who are the most vulnerable are never spoken to or even engaged in how do we do policies, implement them, and what are your needs. Usually everything comes from top, bottom, not bottom up. So if you're going to talk bottom up, then you have to include children to ask, how is this affecting you? What is the heat doing to you? I promise you, a 7-year-old can tell you what is the effect of heat on them. It's not just about I'm hot. It's about when I get to school, I can't concentrate because of the heat. It's because I couldn't get water because mom couldn't go out. It was too hot. So there's ripple effects to this, and if you don't speak to them, then we just assume that we know, but we don't know what affects them directly until you speak to them. So this whole notion of transition and just transition has been boggling my mind for a while. And I actually thought it's all about green. You know, it's about the greenies, the hippies, the tree huggers, you know, the happy people. I don't generally think of myself as a happy person, but, you know, it's for happy people. But then I thought about it, and I think the equation that I've come to is that climate action plus social interventions equals transition. So if we look at the climate and we look at what we can do as society, then we will get just transition. Then we can all be happy people, right? So we need to ensure that vulnerable groups, those that are children, those that are women, in any setting, because again, gender comes into play here, are actually involved in just transition. They should not be left behind, right? Because it's their human rights and their livelihoods we so solely claim to be fighting for. So if you're fighting for it, you need to include them, right? So my takeaways of how do we involve children or their importance is that, one, you need to break the silos that separate government and big corporates from children. So there shouldn't be, there's these oil companies and there's children and human rights. These should not be operating in silos, but they should be operating as one, so that you know that you have a just and inclusive solution to climate justice and just transition. Again, you need to understand transition holistically. So it's not enough to say that the oil companies will do something. It's not enough to say that the departments will do something. It's that everybody needs to do something. From the women in KZN to the ones in the academia must do something. So it should be a holistic approach. The third one is that children's rights must be a foundation to which we fight just transition, right? And then the last one would be children as the workforce also need to be involved, because it's not good enough if the 60-year-old says that we're fighting for transition, you're going to get there. You're not going to get there. The 5-year-old is going to get there. You probably will be dead by then, right? So it's not enough for the 70-year-olds in parliament to be talking about this. There needs to be a child talking about this because they're going to live it out, right? You're 30 years too late, so let's look 30 years forward, right? So a just transition needs to be prioritized by all. It needs to be prioritized by all, and we need to include the children. So when we look at universally, because it's what we must do, universal adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals and the ratification of the Paris Agreement on climate change enables role players from all sectors, right, to use their expertise to fight climate change and also just transition. But bringing it home in what is happening in South Africa, because it's good enough to talk about what the global standards are, but we're living in South Africa. So what's happening in South Africa? So the efforts have been done, but is it enough? You know, there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of policy. There is the Presidential Climate Change Coordinating Commission. There's commissions and policies on policies. But is it enough? Because all that you see on paper is not what's happening in the real world. So to decarbonize us, or to actually get us in a place for the just transition, I think dialogue must happen, not in a portfolio committee in Cape Town, but really on the ground. You need to go invite the child in Messina and the child in Ramatlele and the child in Kwamashu to come together and ask them, what are you doing? So it is evident that the national climate change response strategies and other policies, right, have the ability to recognize and address the problem, but they're still not doing anything. So we need effective representation and meaningful participation of children as a starting point. I'm not saying it's the end goal, but it's a starting point, right? So you'll have not just passive referencing, you'll have development of plans and action integration with the people that it affects the most. So on a last note, I'd just like to say that children must be recognized as a social group because they do have their own ideas and do have their own intellect and can contribute to the table. And as climate change process is going on and on, where we want to be in 30 years starts with the child we asked today. Thank you so much.
Amanda! I really love the point you make about how important it is to include kids because they'll live in the future that we're talking about today. You know, a lot has been said, a lot of insights have been shared, a lot of provocative views have been put forward. And I really would like to hear back from those in the room. But before we share our views, I'm wondering if there's a poet who will help us kind of reflect you know, on this issue. I'd like to, is the poet in the room? Is the poet here? Is Ruben in the room? Yes. Ruben, can you please come forward? Can we give Ruben a clap? As we reflect on what's been shared, let's also hear what Ruben has to say that may inspire questions that we may have or comments we'd like to make. One more time, Ruben.
Sanibonani molweni.
Molo sisi.
Ninjani?
Philile unjani wena?
Igama lami nguMasithole, ngisuke Alexandra. I'm doing storytelling for kids. I am a poet. Usonkondlo. I wrote this poem, I think maybe it's 1 week. I didn't know I will come here. My poem goes, Umphetho wengubo yenkululeko, babe magange belangazelela inkululeko, mehla bevulekile ze bazo bengehaqo ebuthongo, zindlebe zabo zazicijile, ngithi babethu uma nje besingathinta umphetho wengubo yenkululeko. Babizwe ngabakhululwa kwelencindezelo uma besingathinta umphetho wengubo nje lawo ngamazwi abadala nabancane ababelangazelele inkululeko ababeyifisa. Msindo wesibhamu wawunjengewashi kubo wawunjengewashi lovuko empeleni kwaqhuma ubhakabhaka ze babone nje umphetho wengubo yenkululeko babelifisa ikhenana muzi wenkululeko kodwa bathi uma beyibamba empeleni ababe kade beyitholile babacindezela empeleni umphetho wengubo wongagcwalisa okukhulu kakhulu lapho ke sebewuthintile inkululeko iphenduka iGibhithe base bethi kwakungenani ukuba sigcinwe eGibhithe kunokuthi sibe sekhenana kwafika ke okuhluphekile namhlanje ke ngiyakutshela kukhona iload shedding negameni lenkululeko namhlanje khona ke ukungasebenza egameni lenkululeko namhlanje khona ukubulalana egameni lenkululeko babethi nje uma singathinta umphetho wenkululeko namhlanje kuthiwa kukhona iclimate change egameni lenkululeko ongabe bayithola naleyo nkululeko wenkululeko onamhlanje inhlupheko isihaqe izolo namhlanje babodwa bathi bafisa ukusebenza okungabafuni onamhlanje sifundiswa siphendukula amaphara onamhlanje isidakamizwa singene ezabuse emakhaya kungabe sayithola nale yonkululeko ngibuza ke umongameli oliphethe onamhlanje ngabe uyajabula zalala ke alala amaqhawe abizwa ngononkululeko namhlanje bengejabula uma bengavuka beyibuza ukuthi iphi le yonkululeko bathi uma singathinta umphetho wenkululeko abangakaze bayithole ningangivumela nani niyazi impela ukuhlupheka kusihaqile uma sitholeke uSonkondlo eAlexandra.
Hey! Now, if you can ululate, Now, I will not attempt to translate because I will just take away from that piece. However, the central message of it is, we fought for freedom. Is this the freedom we fought for? With unemployment, with load shedding, with climate change, is this the freedom we fought for? All right. Woo. It goes. How are we going to do this? We have 2 mics. We have a mic on this side and a mic for this side. I'm going to start off with 3 hands. Actually, maybe let's make it fair. 4 hands. So 2 hands from this side, 2 hands, just to start us off. We'll take it from there. I love the excitement in the room. I see your hand. I'll note these 2 hands, but you come next. So there'll be a couple of rounds. Don't worry if you're not in the first round. So this side, I've noted your hand, ma'am, and then gentlemen at the side over there. And then on this side, I'll have the lady at the front and the gentleman at the back. Let's start on this side with the lady with the black T-shirt. Please say your name. Please say your name and just share your comment or your question with us.
Thank you. My name is Phumla Ngesi. I'm from the Rivonia Circle. Thank you for quite interesting bullets. I'll call them bullets. They are very informative. They are very eye-opening. And for me, I've had many aha moments as you were deliberating. Now, just transitions. I want to comment on that with a question in between. Because the concept of just transition captures me, and it took me to the way we try to manage or implement transitions as South Africans. It took me back to how, as I don't want to do fault finding here. I just want to present a case of the powers that be, policymakers, implementers of policies, their approach to implementing transition, just that concept. I want to unpack that and my wish on this particular climate crisis, how we could approach it differently. I want to bring a case in point. When we were managing transition in education, post-1994, I'm a primary school teacher by training and profession. And I was trained in one of the best colleges in South Africa. So when I left the college, I knew what I was going to do in the classroom. Despite the fact that I was trained under the old system of the Department of Education and Training, when there was transition, I don't remember any team coming to us, asking us, how do we envisage taking education in South Africa post-1994? Instead, one day we woke up and we had outcomes-based education. We were told to implement a component of an educational approach of some pedagogy from God knows where to come and implement it in a South African context. I was teaching in Duncan Village. I'm from Duncan Village in the Eastern Cape. So I'm expected to teach a Duncan Village child with an OBE approach from America.
Sure.
That they were bringing transition in education, but they did not consult us. They implement us. We're still dealing with OBE. They came with with NCS, National Curriculum Statement. We had to throw away OBE together with everything that came with OBE, and those are funds. We're throwing away money. We were trained. Then we need now to implement National Curriculum Statement. Again, there's training, retraining now from OBE. We were still busy with NCS. They came with RNCS.
Sure.
Revised National Curriculum Statement.
Yeah.
We had to jump the wagon into RNCS. And that's when I went off the wagon in 2006.
Sure.
After teaching for 12 and a half years. I went into community development. Now, there's CAPS now. In between that, there was ANA. So there's many changes, and all this, it's because things happen at that level of policy makers, policy changing, and all that. They're being done by people who have the knowledge. However, the people who are affected, I like what you said, the children, the people who are affected, the consultative processes, it's like there's a hurry. We need to go there. We need to tick this box. So my plea on this platform, as we're facing this crisis, whereby we have people who do not even understand why there's global warming, there's this and this,
Right.
but they know what they're experiencing.
Sure.
So I plead that the transformation be managed the way it should, such that everybody is on the wagon, knowing which note to use to transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we move on to the next speaker, my appeal to everyone in the room who'd like to share their thoughts is to please keep it succinct and short. I know we would like to stay here and have this conversation until the sun sets, but we cannot. So I would like you to please keep it brief. I'm also going to ask the speakers to only respond after each round. So I'm not going to ask them to comment at the moment until everyone has spoken during this first round. So go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. Good day, everyone. My name is Nkosinachi Kambule. Thank you to be part of this, to engage with you. Thanks to the panelists as well for the lovely presentations which just they gave us. Thanks for the insight. So now, I don't see justice as far as we are as a country from, let me say, coming back from slavery to apartheid, colonialism and whatever. So Abu Warchambo, if they can wake up, they could be in tears. If now they witness, which we still have gatherings and talk about democracy and freedom. So by so saying, I mean that we have not attained democracy or enjoying the fruits of democracy. Because now we have a constitution, first of all, which now permits us, which we live in a healthy environment and that is protected and whatever. But now, people are not satisfied with the environments they find themselves living in. Like Uputim too has said, which abantu they living near your rivers, but infrastructure aibavumeli which babe ne proper easy access to water. And then we have our policies, like sometimes we get excited when they're speaking of this just transition to a low carbon economy. But now we have your renewable energy IPP what program, procurement program. Is it working for us environmentally wise? Is it now we are on, we are declared to be on national state of emergency or on energy. So, and we have an obligation to move to a low carbon economy. And then the developments that are happening.
Sure.
Abo minister bakutshela ukuthi we sivusa ama units ethuthuka.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, with the chuchua, they're using carbon intensive economy. So, your national emission reduction strategy is not when it comes to that. So, we can have a framework and restorative justice, distribution justice, but these procedures, they are proving which there is no justice in these procedures because me from HMBisa, I do not qualify to be kuma big windows, big windows, ESCOM. So still there's no justice.
Right. Siyabuza Bhutam. Thank you. Noted. Let's clap hands for him. I'm going to move on to this side and the lady and then last the gentleman. Hold on, there'll be another round. I see those hands, but there'll be another round. Maybe not as many as I'd hoped in lots of time, but there'll be another round. Yes, please.
Ngiyanibingelela futhi. Siyabonga kuba hlonishwa baphambili. Njoba ngishilo ukuthi ke I'm doing storytelling. I-climate change ke esinye sezifo ezikhona ikakhulukazi uma ubheka ingane. There's no 4 seasons. Even ngangivumela. Khona manje kuyabanda kusehlobo nini winter liyana so i-climate ama seasons awesekho due to i-climate change. Kwenzekile ke la ngihlala khona ngihlala eAlexandra eJardini we are 40 rooms with 95 people. So abantu for urban immigration ukusuka emakhaya beze edrobheni angithi bezofuna umsebenzi uthola ukuthi sebakha phezulu kwama drain okunye kwezinto ezilimazayo ezithinta le climate change esikhuluma ngayo ebese futhi ngithinta ekutheni mhlawumbe umhopho lo wemali noma abaphathiswa abakhulu baqhamuka namagama amakhulu beze kithi thina singafundanga khona manje bazocampaign abecampaignela ukuthi ba electwa ngithi sinenkinga njengamanje ye climate change engabe kukhulunywa ngayo ukuthi abantu abasha mhlawumbe efanele basebenze kodwa in years to come bayobe besebenzaphi ngoba kuthiwa bavule amabhizinisi olama business abangeba kwazi ukuwavula njengoba ubhuta beshilo ukuthi ke uthola ukuthi ke kwamanzi asetshenziswayo abantu bamafemi bazochitha khona njenge Joskay mungaye Joskay i-Brown iJoskay bachitha izinto zabo okusho ukuthi ngeke kwazi ukuthi ibhizinisi lingakwazi ukuqhubeka yiphi yona le employment esikhuluma ngayo entshene ezayo noma entshene yamanje okusho ukuthi lentsha ingagcina njengamanje ina 18 years to come bayobe na 40 or 36 sekuthiwa abasaqhasheki abasaqhashwa yilo hulumeni wamanje so sinenkinga esiyibhekile enkulu kakhulu ongathi bahlonishwe ngathi menihleli nihambe nekuye kunezinto efanele should even to bill of right kunezinto efanele ishintshwe kodwa ke sizogcina siyizwe elingenamsebenzi futhi sigcine siyizwe elingathuthukile ngoba kuqhamuka abantu begijimela amathenda bavula ama project bambe lapha yakunamanzi akhuphuka eAlexandra lawo manzi igcina ingane ezingalimala kodwa bagcine bengawaqedanga siyabonga
sis.
All right, thank you. My name is Andy Lemlambo. So walking into this room and listening to the panelists, you think you're talking about different topic, but you're all talking about just transition. So what it says to me, this is my comments, right? Is that, like you said, we are very unequal. And when we approach this just transition, that should be one thing that is borne in mind, that we're not an equal society. Why I'm saying this, if you're going to have a central approach for distribution of just transition, we are setting ourselves for failure. I mean, the lady was speaking about education. We can take an example, for instance, from education, where they have that, I think it's I stand to be corrected, it's a quintile system, where you have quintile 1, schools 2, 3, 4, 5, meaning the quintile 1, 2, 3 schools don't pay school fees. So the approach when you deal with those schools is different from affluent schools. So my thing is that if you're going to approach just transition to say, it's a one thing, one size fits all, you're going to fail. even now, if you're having these dialogues, I think they must be decentralized to a point where you speak to a community who are facing certain different problems. At Vaal, they're having a water problem, right? They have too much water, but not distribution. In Gqeberha, there's drought. They're facing day zero. So you see the difference. So if you're in one room and you are speaking, it might not relate to them. So that's my point. And then on the IPG, well, you're talking about the international partner groups. So that's the thing. We need a South African just transition, not just a just transition. Because if it's influenced by Germany or the IPG, you saw what the US did. They are party to funding. Then they did the Willow project, just I think last week. They're the ones who approved the oil and gas drilling. But they're the ones part of the IPG telling our country how to transition.
Sure.
So I think we must have a South African just transition. Thank
Come
you.
on. Thank you. Okay, so what are we going to do, right? I've been taking notes as people have been commenting and asking questions. And I'd like to direct some of the comments to some of the panelists just so that we manage our time better, right? And so I'd like, Julia, for you to respond to the 2 comments around the approach to just transition. An example was given about how it's done in education versus, the whole international partners, etc. So if you could speak to that. And then I'm going to ask you, Vish, if you could speak just generally to the points around how all these issues kind of build on each other. A lady spoke about urban, migrant people coming to urban areas because of possibly famine in rural communities. So if you can just respond to that. And then to you, I'd like you to respond to the point around how do we make our leaders, think differently about solving these issues. So yeah, in that order, can I ask you just to comment briefly?
Sure, thanks, Letiwe. Can you hear me? I mean, I don't really have too much to add. I agree completely with the comments. I think a just transition, any transition, can't come from the top down. It has to be contextual. There has to be participation and meaningful engagement on every level, particularly from the areas where there's going to be the most severe impacts of climate change. And so there is a drive for participatory justice specifically within a just transition. But I'm nervous to say, oh, well, we must just have participatory justice, because often people can tick the box. You can have an event, you tick the box, you get the register, everyone's attended, everyone was there, it's all fine. But to have meaningful participation and to drive a democratic just transition is harder and so important. And how we do that, I mean, I don't have the answers. I think we need to figure out as a country, and I think it's linked to movement building. It's linked to protests and march and local organization, because stories like Mdu's about water access in the Vaal are exactly what we need to inform how we address water crisis in a just transition. So yeah, I think that's all I'd add. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. Vish, over to you.
So I just want to start with the just transition question.
Sure, go ahead.
And deepen that. Can you hear me?
Maybe can I have the
Can you hear me?
the cordless mic, maybe, just to support? Oh, sorry, I didn't see it there.
So this document is about the South African just transition. It comes out of the struggles of drought-affected communities, and we convene them in dialogue to get their ideas. It comes out of communities facing hunger in the country. It comes from the labor movement. It comes from the faith-based communities. It comes from social justice organizations. We used all of 2019 to convene these conversations and to clarify what do we mean by the just transition. So we're not starting from zero. This charter is about the deep just transition, not the shallow just transition.
Yeah.
It's about transformation.
Right.
Because everything has to be changed. Now this relates to the question. I mean, carbon is implicated in almost everything that we need and use to live. Okay, from our food to our transport, to how we work, our computers, our carbon-intensive technologies, etc. So it is a big challenge. It's a large-scale challenge. But we can decarbonize. and we can build adaptive systems. Now, the Charter talks about 14 systemic alternatives. And these are people's alternatives, movements' alternatives. I'll give you one or two examples. The issue of eco-housing. The kind of housing we have in South Africa right now hasn't prepared us to deal with climate extremes, okay? We need to think differently about housing, and particularly meeting housing needs. There's a big housing shortage in this country, but the kinds of homes we need to build have to take into account extreme rainfall, extreme heat, etc. So this is going to be a very, very important challenge as part of that just transition. The other idea is around water. I mean, we've been talking with Imdu about water, but we have water sitting on dams, 5,000 odd dams on farms. We have water in our rivers. We don't have very deep, big rivers, but we have rivers. We have groundwater, etc. How do we manage all of that water in a way that is democratic, that is consistent with the Constitution, and so everybody has access to water as a commons, as a public good? So these are the ideas in the Climate Justice Charter. And the final point I'll make is that we're busy translating it into policies. Because that is the crucial thing.
Yep.
We've got to figure out these things at a nuts and bolts level. Climate jobs. So the youth challenge is a very important challenge.
Yeah.
And that's why the Charter is about speaking to the legacies of apartheid. We must start from where we've come from. That's the point about this Charter. That's why it's deeply South African. So our youth, their futures have been stolen by the ANC, and we've got to be able to talk about that honestly and genuinely. I'm a child of the South African liberation struggle and deeply, deeply disappointed with what has happened. So the next struggle for all of you, particularly young people, is the climate justice struggle.
Yeah.
And you can shape that and give it meaning and content and affirm your aspirations and needs. Amandla.
On that note, how do we, as young people, to the point that was made earlier, how do we challenge our leaders, even at a community level?
Yes. I think we have already done so much work that, for instance, communities are never being heard. South African communities have been on social protest for the past 10 to 15 years now. We are never being heard. But the point I'm trying to make is we have been doing so much work such that we are never being heard.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to bring to the town hall is that we have climate change as an issue of service delivery, or pollution as an issue of service delivery, and this is one of a power element we hold towards going to the voting polls, especially. We have politicians who always promise us, things that they never deliver, and most of the time, we need to go there, ahead of our times.
Yeah.
When they talk about integrated development plans, we need to have documents like this one so that they make priority issues in such development plan.
Sure.
So we have done so much of groundwork that we are never being heard. But most of the time, most of the work that we do is also not being better recognized.
But there's hope.
There is
hope. All right. Last round, good people. And I'm going to ask also for some extra time. I don't know if we can. And 15 minutes. All right, cool. So you've been patient. You will go first. So from this side, I can only take four hands once more. So I see new hands, but I cannot take all of them. So gentleman over there that's been patiently waiting. The lady over here, just to be fair, the lady over here, right? And then on this side, there was a lady with the red T-shirt and the gentleman with the white right at the back. So those are our last four. But we can continue this conversation even afterwards. As you're walking around, as you're experiencing the festival, continue having these conversations. Sir, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. In South Africa, we use buzzwords like now, just transition is the most popular one nowadays. And we always fail at implementation. I think certain examples have been made here. So a lot I've heard from the panelists, thank you very much for sharing that information about the holistic approach, issues around water and the charter itself, and the inequalities that we are seeing out there. So I was just wondering from another point of view, in terms of us as individuals, other than the big corporates and big emitters and all of that, what can we as individuals in South Africa can do in terms of, if we can just look at the issue of waste management. So in the charter, it talks about zero waste and simple living. I just want to understand, to what extent can we as individuals play a role to minimize carbon emissions in terms of landfills, sites, in terms of recycling, reuse, what we as individuals can do. And the other part, I want to understand, maybe the panelists can assist with this, in terms of to what extent things like waste contribute in the bigger picture in terms of emissions, percentage-wise, and then to say, we as individuals, to what extent can we then try and minimize that?
Thank you so much. The lady at the front.
Thank you. Sanibonani.
Yebo.
Igama lami nguSibongile waKaNdlovu. Angisukumi nokubuza umbuzo. I stand up to make a comment.
Yes, please.
I just want to say I'm grateful for this space. And I want to agree with you, Mdude, when you say, as NGOs, we have done so much.
Yeah.
It's now up to the government to do what they are supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Because NGOs are working on limited resources. We don't have anything, but we are trying our best. Just now they've done that booklet to educate people.
Sure.
And this is supposed to be done by government. And I'm grateful that this setup here, the space that we are in, everyone is it's able to reach the space and be here and share information.
Right.
Because now we are living around a lot of inequality. We are living around a lot of we are living in extreme poverty, high employment rate. Those are the results of climate change. But a lot of people don't know about these issues. So I would like to say to everyone that is in the house, please share this information.
Yeah.
Take it back to your communities, to your constituencies, to your projects, to your programs.
Yeah.
Because now it's a few of us that are able to come and be here, but the majority is not here. And the majority is the one that is affected.
Sure.
So keep up the good work.
On that note, Amandla! Amandla! The lady in the red t-shirt, please.
Hello everybody, my name is Shaifin Shumba. My question is on inequality. We all know that there is 63% of uneducated and unemployed youth. And mostly when you go around Joburg, you can find some of the young youth polishing tires for taxi drivers to get that R5 from Magwinya for our next lunch. So I wanted to ask, how do we help them?
Thank you. And last, the gentleman at the back.
Okay, Dumela.
Okay.
Ke Toto a bua.
Toto.
So I just like to interrogate this concept, just transition. Not far from here, at Boxback, there's a community at Jerusalem, informal settlement. They are staying right behind, they're staying under the tailing dams. So for the mother who's staying there, who doesn't get water, who is unemployed, who when it's rainy, she's affected by acid mine drainage. We talked about it. And also there's a kids just next to Boxback at Rechapa community. They are affected by tailing dams, whereby their mothers, they give birth to deformed kids. So I just wanted to interrogate this concept, just transition.
Yeah.
Is it really just and fair?
Sure.
And by the way, I'm not sure what's the just meaning by Sotho. It's fair, ane? Just, it means fair by Sotho.
Oh, okay.
And by Zulu, it means nje.
Well, that's a direct. I mean, we can debate this matter.
Yes.
But not in the way that you've used it. It depends on how you use it in the sentence, sir. Okay. But I hear your point. You make a valid point about translating this concept in a way that we can understand.
Yes.
And I hear that point very well.
Yes.
Can I ask some of the to respond or something else you want to add?
No, it's fine. No, thanks.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. So What I'd like to do, the point that you raised, sir, is a point that I was actually going to make right at the end, as I was about to ask each panelist to give us, practical advice. What can we do? So I'm going to hold on to that until the end, and I'm going to ask Kulo to please respond to the 2 points actually. The one around young people who are unemployed. You are a young person yourself, so you can draw from that as well. But also the point around women and children that are most affected, and you alluded to that point earlier when you spoke about, the need to ensure that we talk to women and children and understand from their perspective how the climate crisis affects their lives. So please go ahead.
Okay. They asked the question about mothers and children.
Yes, he made that point.
I think there's numerous examples we could do about the wastage that's happening. If you look in Nelspruit, there is the mines that children are born of cleft because of the environment that they're in. That's the most cleft-affected environment in South Africa. Most children that are cleft inclined, which means they are born with an opening in their nose, their mouth, and the gum, are from there. I think it goes back to what all colleagues have been saying throughout our speeches, that we need a holistic approach. It's not enough to say that we've done a consultative process in Alexander, Soweto, and Tembisa. We've concluded it. I think you need to go to the woman that is experiencing it. If the woman in Alexander is experiencing it because there is a sewage running down, then someone in Nelspruit is experiencing it in a different way, and someone in the township in Durban is doing it in a different way. So I think it goes back to this issue of holistic and intentional consultations.
Right.
I think that's where the key word is. Intention should be that we're not ticking a box to say, okay, we went, they came, they ate, they got a free t-shirt, and they left. It should be that you're intentional about it. And even in the charter, it holds governments accountable,
Right.
and it says that what should we do in policy making to
Right.
make sure that all groups are included. And then in terms of unemployment, I mean, this is something I think even all of us are grappling with. It's not just the climate justice activists or the youth unemployment activists. I think, though, if I was to make a practical example, in Ulundi, there is a small organization made up of 6 women and 4 men. So what they do is they're called Waste for Change. They go house to house every single day, Sunday to Sunday, asking, what is your waste in the home? They take that waste, they sort that waste, they take it to the municipality or to other places, and they get money from that. So that's what they have done to get money
Right.
in terms of fighting unemployment. I think there's practical steps
Yeah.
that we could all do to fight unemployment.
Yeah.
I think it's not enough to say that we will hold government accountable. We need to hold ourselves accountable. And if there's something you can do, really there's no shame with a woman with a child on her back going house to house saying, can I have your bins?
Yeah.
And going to get money, which will then go to poo and they're going to eat at home that night.
Right.
So I think there's different ways to look at unemployment, and really the shame factor is not, it should be thrown out the window and
Yeah.
really get down to working with your hands.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been quite an insightful afternoon. I know there may be many questions, and I really encourage you to have discussions outside of this forum to get those answers. But in closing, I'm going to ask each panelist to speak on what can we do. And Vish, I'm going to start with you, because when the gentleman made the point about what can we do, what practical steps can we take, he made reference to what you say in the charter about wastage. So I'm going to start with you, Josh, to address that point and then give us practical advice.
Okay. So we can't live like the Americans and the American way of life. We'll need 3 or 4 planets. It's wasteful, it's resource intensive, it's carbon intensive, it's polluting, etc. So this thing in the charter around simple living and zero waste is about getting us to really try and figure out how do we live within the sort of limits and boundaries of nature, our planet, etc. Central to that is rethinking consumption. So we are all meant to be consumers, and we're all meant to be mass consumers, and we're meant to drive growth and drive the big macro economy and so on and so on. That process is killing us. It's as simple as that. So we really got to rethink waste. We need to rethink resources. The just transition requires key strategic minerals to make it happen for solar, for batteries, for new kinds of transport, etc. Those resources are very limited. I'll give you an example of vanadium. South Africa is one of the countries that is very well endowed in vanadium, and we can have vanadium batteries beyond lithium. But then again, how do we think about extraction so we don't create problems for communities? How do we manage these resources very, very carefully so that we think about solutions that are collective? This is the point about the charter. So simple living would mean, instead of individual electric vehicles, we have clean energy public transport, because there are limited resources to make this happen. So that's one example of a collective solution. In terms of renewable energy, we have collective energy pools in our communities, etc., rather than each household individually buying a battery, etc., etc. This is what simple living means. It's an invite to rethink how we exist with nature and other people. The point about climate jobs, I just want to stress it because it's part of how we think about solutions and systemic solutions. So for young people, there are millions of jobs that are possible within the deep just transition. Climate jobs. And let me tell you what a climate job is. A climate job is that you're doing something that doesn't emit carbon, it is decent, and you, of course, get a means to survive. Now, in South Africa, and we're busy, as I said, with policies, some of the ideas we can see are as follows. So, keeping our rivers clean. Our rivers need to be kept clean, and Fergal can tell you a lot about that. But we can get young people to do that. We can get them to watchdog our water resources, because we're a water-scarce country. The next big drought is coming. That's a climate job. We can get young people to work in clean energy public transport systems. That's a climate job. We can get young people to work in gardens, in communities, in small-scale farms that are agroecological. You're sequestering carbon, but you're also feeding your family and your community. That's a climate job. We can get young people to protect and keep resilient our biodiversity and ecosystems. That's a climate job. So in short, there's potential in the modeling and in the research and in the thinking and the policy work we're doing for millions of climate jobs for our young people. So my two final points is, I'm here to invite you to join us in the Climate Justice Charter movement to develop the 14 alternatives in the Charter into policies. And together we can figure it out. There's many young people leading these processes, by the way, and they really tuned in. They're doing research, they're grappling. So please come on board. The last point I'll make is that all of us living today, all of us, young and old, can solve the climate problem together within the time span that we have. And the Charter is a compass. It provides us principles to test, to gauge whether the transition is transformative, whether the transition is deep, whether the transition is just. So please use it in your everyday struggles, in your community, in your workplaces. Amandla.
One thing that we can do, just one.
Yes.
Let's see. Can you speak without the mic? Let's see. No, please use the mic.
Yes. You one thing.
I know it's time.
I think a low carbon economy is something that is not new. It is a subject that is not new, especially if you look at rural communities. These people have been living a low carbon economy for the rest of their lives. For instance, they mostly walk a long distance where they have to go somewhere, especially to the shops or town. They walk and then they don't even have electricity, these people. So I live in the rural community for the past 4 years now. I know what I'm talking about. So it's not a new subject or topic. I think we need to be fair as South Africans, and especially in observation, when we have to talk about a just transition, because many of the things have been happening without being better recognized.
Sure.
We have climate jobs that existed for so many years. We
Yeah.
have, and I want to emphasize on what Prof is saying, and because we haven't been doing much justice especially the environmental justice movement. We've done so much work in South Africa, but in the midst of so much work being done, it has never been given better recognition.
Sure.
So much as it has to be better amplified.
Yeah.
I was sitting in a workshop with AIDC. They hosted us here in Van der Bijl Park. There was NUMSA there, ESCOM workers were there.
Yeah.
We were talking about just transition. And one of the fears is the jobs,
Yeah.
for instance, when we transition. We haven't been making enough justice, for instance, Prof, because we do have climate jobs, they exist.
Yeah.
Something we are not talking about, we have green jobs,
Yeah.
they differ in terms of climate jobs. We have blue jobs, they
Yeah.
differ in terms of climate jobs. We have brown jobs.
Yeah.
We have so many jobs that we are not doing in South Africa.
Sure.
So many.
Sure.
And if we were to start doing it, and especially recognize communities that are doing or practicing a low carbon economy,
Yeah.
then we are getting there, like Prof is saying.
Sure.
We are the solutions.
Got you. Thank you so much, Mtu. Julia?
Okay, I'm going to try to be quick.
Please.
But I would say there's things that we can do as individuals that we know about.
Right.
You know, reduce your water usage, recycle, you know, take public transport, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But actually, because of the inequality in the way that carbon emissions are generated, something that's going to be even more impactful is to demand that we ban private jets. Or we ban private yachts.
Right.
And we have a wealth tax.
Right.
Because at the moment, taxes have been reduced for the wealthy in South Africa.
Yeah.
And we need money to support public service provision to address inequality.
Right.
And so we really need to start demanding for progressive taxation, and a wealth tax is one of those.
Come on.
I don't think I need this. Oh, do I
do you
need
want
this?
me to hold it? Please,
All
yeah,
right.
just to
In
amplify.
30 seconds. Then.
Yeah,
Can
you-
you
yeah.
hear me? Is it on?
Yeah, you can. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't think it's on. Okay, can everybody hear me? Or should I do it with the mic? Okay. In 1 minute, 60 seconds, I would say what we need to do, the buy-in of the most vulnerable should be taken into account. I think you need the buy-in of women, you need the buy-in of children, you need the buy-in of those that are most affected to make just transition a reality.
Sure.
I think there's no way we can say us in the room here will make it happen without their buy-in. So you need everybody's buy-in, everybody on board, everybody understanding. So I need to be able to explain hore so you need everybody to understand what are we talking about, and then we'll have forward movement.
Come on. I love that each of the panelists, you know, gave really tangible steps that we can take. We can join the Climate Justice Charter movement. We can amplify the jobs that are already there. We can call for the wealth tax. We can make sure that we have the buy-in of the most affected. So there's something that you can do, and I really charge you to take note and take action. Thank you all so much, but I'm going to hand the mic over to Farrell to say thank you to our panelists and to everyone for joining us.
So, thank you, everyone. I think it's been a really wonderful afternoon and very, very insightful discussion and very honest comments. I think I was sitting there and thinking on what was being said about the just transition, and I said, for the first time, it's being honest. We're not lying to people, and I think that in itself is powerful. It gives us something to start with, and it gives us the right hope. So thank you to all our panelists. It's been fantastic. I just want to add one thing. The whole idea of today's discussion was to discuss a just transition pathway. And